Good morning to one and all. I, Professor Raghavendra Prasad Shetty, Assistant Professor, REVA Business School, extend a warm welcome to this second RBS Distinguished Lecture Series. RBS Distinguished Lecture Series is an initiative of REVA Business School to bring in eminent experts from various fields to share their views, expertise, opinions on contemporary topics. The aim of the Distinguished Lecture Series is inviting brilliant speakers for delivering stimulating lectures on intriguing topics. REVA Business School is hosting the second talk in the series for B School students after Dr. Justin Paul's talk, which focused on faculty members and researchers. We at REVA Business School assure all our students that we would invite speakers of global eminence from among the world's leading intellectuals and policymakers to spark transformative ideas for our shared future in a world of unprecedented complexity, interdependence, and opportunity to talk across boundaries. The discourse for the future will have to be led by the world's brightest minds in dialogue with youth. By giving all of you a brief and setting the context for today's talk, I, Professor Raghavendra Prasad Shetty, take immense pride in welcoming our distinguished speaker for the day, Ms. Monica Lim, Head of Internal Auditing, Goldman Sachs, to REVA Business School, REVA University. Welcome, ma'am. I also deem it as my privilege to welcome our Dean, Dr. Shubha. Welcome you, ma'am. I also welcome Dr. Neeraj Kumar Singh, Director Admissions, Branding, REVA University, who was instrumental in connecting us to Ms. Monica Lim. He's not there in the venue, but he will be joining us soon. I welcome you, sir. I welcome Director of School of Commerce and Director of School of Management Studies, Dr. M. Subramaniam and Dr. Neetu Ghosh. Welcome. My colleagues and most importantly, my student friends to this distinguished lecture series, welcome you all. It's my privilege to introduce our distinguished guest to the audience of REVA family today. Monica Lim is Head of Internal Audit for Goldman Sachs, Bengaluru and Hyderabad. Previously, she was responsible for Hong Kong and Tokyo Internal Audit for the Global Markets Division. Monica joined Goldman Sachs in 2006 and was named Managing Director in 2017. Prior to joining the firm, Monica worked in the audit and advisory practices of KPMG in Singapore. Monica is a member of the Institute of Internal Auditors and the Institute of Singapore Chartered Accountants in Singapore. Monica earned a bachelor's degree in accountancy from Nanyang Technological University, Singapore in 1998. Now, as a part of our REVA tradition and Karnataka culture, we would like to felicitate Ms. Monica Lim. May I now request our Dean, Dr. Shubha, Dr. Neeraj, Dr. Subramaniam, Dr. Neetu Ghosh to join us on stage to felicitate Ms. Monica Lim. Music. As we all know the topic, role of internal audit in organization. It's important to achieve organizational objectives should be the prime focus of every organization. In this direction, there should be an establishment of an autonomous audit department in the organization that will ensure prudence in financial affairs of the company. To give us more on the topic, I will hand over the session to Ms. Monica Lim, Soon after ma'am's talk, we will take few questions as well. Now I'll hand over to Miss Monica. Over to you, ma'am.
Hi, good morning. Yes, I have not had such a royal treatment before, so that was extremely interesting for me. Yeah. So first and foremost, I definitely would like to thank REVA University for this invitation. I'm really excited to be here. I have been involved in audit-related work, starting with statutory audit in KPMG, and then moving on to advisory internal audit in KPMG as well, and then go on to Goldman Sachs. So I really hope that today I can leverage my practitioner experience just to provide to you what internal audit is about, how does it look like in a day-to-day, and also what do we really think when it comes to this job. So given that today's topic is around the role of internal audit in an organization, I thought it may be interesting to start with a little bit of history. Why did internal audit exist? And when did internal audit exist? So I did a little bit of research, and when we look at the paper that was published in the Institute of Internal Audit Research Foundation in 2003, auditing is about as old as accounting. As far back as 4000 before Common Era, historians believe that formal record-keeping systems were first instituted by the governments and organized businesses in the Near East, so that's around Turkey, as well as Egypt area, to actually address their concerns that are the officials accounting for the receipts and disbursement of cash and taxes collected correctly. Right. The need and the indication of audits can be traced back to public finance system in Babylonia, in Greece, the Roman Empire, the states of Italy, etc. All of which, when we look back, there is already a concept of checks and counter-checks that was in place. So, go back to civilization, we don't trust each other, we want to verify that things are correct. So specifically, one of the key things around, when it comes to human worth, are they corruption? Are they fraud? Are assets misappropriated? And also when it comes to bookkeeping, is it accurate? And are there opportunities for people who have stolen without people knowing, right? So when we look at that in history, there was actually, the concept was already exists in place. The roots of auditing in general was also mentioned by an accounting historian, Richard Brown. He did say that the origin of auditing goes back to time, scarcely less remote than that of accounting, whenever the advance of civilization brought upon the necessity of one man being entrusted with the asset of another man, the advisability of some kind of check upon the fidelity of the former is necessary. So when we look back to India, India's first Company Act was legislated in 1857. And in 1866, the first law around relating to the maintenance of account and audit was introduced. So it was more than 200 years ago. And also at the time, it was mandated that there's a specific requirement of what qualification an auditor needs to be. So actually, India was pretty advanced when it comes to accounting and audit. As centuries passed, with the Industrial Revolution, business started to grow in size, in complexity, and therefore the need of an independent assurance system became more apparent. We need to verify the financial information that was used for decision-making by management, especially in the turn of the 20th century. That's when the Industrial Revolution was in place. When we look at the size of those Rockefellers, Ford, they were actually growing in volume. And also, that means that when you grow in volume, you grow in complexity, the number of employees increase. So the management or the business owner become further and further remote. They can't really check from the beginning to the end what exactly was happening. So they started to delegate down to their direct reportees or their agents to provide report to confirm how the business is doing. But as human nature, we will want to report the best. We may even mask things that are not going right. So the business owners really require somebody who's skilled, somebody who's independent, and objective to be able to verify whether these reports are correct. So, while today, Companies Act, exchange regulations, financial institution regulators, they actually talk about, and their regulation laid out to mandate internal audit function to exist in the organization. But truth be told, it is actually business necessity that created internal audit and making it an integral part of the business. So, that was the history around the concept of auditing started. So how did it derive to the internal audit, the modern internal audit today? I did remember, I think when we go back to the early days, internal audit was still perceived to be very closely related to statutory audit. And at the time, it was more called upon to help statutory audit, like performing bank statement reconciliation, to help to support the statutory auditors to actually opine on the financial statements. But in the early 1940s, the Institute of Internal Audit was first established in the Americas. And that's when we started rethinking about what is the role between internal audit versus external audit. Around, I would say, 1947, that was a time when IIA, Institute of Internal Audit, issued a statement of the responsibilities of the internal auditor. And that was a time that they clearly clarified that the internal auditor should move beyond financial statements. They should be concerned around the operating matters of the organization. So that is where the start of the modern internal audit era begins. So in 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, the internal audit profession went through a lot of changes. And that was the time when the standards of the profession started to be established. There was other implementation and practice guidance as well. So a lot of people actually associate the beginning of the modern internal audit with the establishment of the IIA. And at the time, there was a lot of thought leadership like Victor Brinks, Lawrence Sawyer, who were instrumental to actually establish those statements and to broaden about and define what is truly the role of internal audit. Just a recap, as a statutory auditor, those who actually opine on the accounts, so their objective is actually to provide an independent assurance on the true and fair view of the financial statements. Whereas for the internal audit, you're actually more concerned around the governance, the risk management practices, the processes in order to help the management as well as the board to fulfill their responsibilities to the stakeholders as well as to the organization. So if I were to look at the work, an organization may not have internal controls. So that would have been terrible from an internal audit perspective. But if I'm able to do enough vouching, I'm able to trace back all the documents and verify that the numbers are true and fair, the organization will still get a clean opinion from the statutory auditors because your objective is just to opine on whether the numbers are correct. So that's roughly, in a high level, is the distinction of the work between a statutory auditor as well as an internal auditor. So just go on now is, what is the role of internal audit today in an organization? I would say that it's very much concisely captured in the mission statement of IIA, mission statement of IIA for internal audit, which is to A, enhance and protect the organizational value by providing risk-based and objective assurance. 2, advise. 3, insight. Sounds very wordy, but what does that mean exactly? So it comes to risk-based and objective assurance. Why do we say risk-based? If we look at the organization today, an organization like my firm is at easily 10,000 people today. Some organizations are 20,000. Infosys, I think, is in the hundreds of thousands. How many internal auditors do you want to employ to verify the operations? There's no way that an internal audit functions will be able to audit 100% every year. So resources are finite. We need to be commercial on our approach in the use of resources. So we will have to use a risk-based approach to determine what needs to be covered and to what extent do we cover. So that's where the risk-based come in. And it's through a process of risk assessment, we will have to consider a lot of criteria like what is the inherent risk of this function? What is the control risk of function? Inherent risk is the risk whereby, by virtue of you engaging in these activities, what is the risk emerging? And then for control risk, how well are the controls in place to mitigate those inherent risks that's coming? So a combination of those two factors generally are the ones that facilitate for us to prioritize each function, when do we cover and what do we cover. So when we actually approach the audit itself, we have to use a combination of testing techniques and approaches to actually validate, A, is the control design appropriate? And B, assuming the design, being internal auditors, we will look at the 3 lines framework. We are considered the 3rd line. We are independent from the rest of the management. We report directly to the board of directors so that we are not influenced by the stature of the other business lines. So how does it play out? For example, for my performance review, I can choose 8 people. I can only choose up to 2 people who are not from internal audit, because we cannot let them influence my performance review. Otherwise, my behavior and my decision may be incorrectly or impaired by, because I think this person can affect my performance and therefore my comp. So I cannot have too many people. So we actually restricted to up to 25% for non-IA. So that's one way for us to maintain independence. The reporting line as well has to be very clear. We report directly to the board. So we have the right to challenge CEO as well, in order for them to say that when we find something true, we should be able to report directly without any fear. So that's, in a nutshell, is around risk-based and objective. So that comes to the second part, which is advice. What is advice? So an internal auditor who's skilled, you will have subject matter, and the other one is about risk and control mindset. And that allows them to provide value-added services to the management. So how does it play out in an organization? So, for example, an organization could be going through a new project, such as system implementation. There could be new business integration. There could be a new function migrating, say, from another location to India. So what role do we play here? Typically, we will sit in an observer group. We will use our knowledge to actually challenge, to say, do you think about this? If you were to bring this over, what risk are we taking on? Are you prepared for it? We could easily challenge, say, the skill sets, the organization structure, the leadership, the ability of the firm to take on this function. Is this licensed? Can we be done out of India? So those are the things that we think about and we discuss it. So we actually did not start auditing yet. That actually hasn't started. We are in what we call the pre-implementation phase, and we pair up and work with the manager to make sure they thought comprehensively of what is the risk and challenge them on what they think they should put in place in order to make sure that the new changes are successful. But there's one catch here. As an internal auditor, being the 3rd line and being objective, we have to be very careful not to influence or design the process for the management. So it's always a tussle, honestly, in real life between us, whereby the management will say, tell us what to do. We say, no, we can't. But we can challenge and ask you to think about what you'd like to do, and we can opine and give you suggestion about why it may work, or do you think about this risk? So it's always a tussle, and there's always a natural discussion that management would like to ask you to design for it, so that it's you who design it. Why are you raising findings on me right now? So that's the tussle. So the 3rd point, which is on insights, which is one of our obligation and responsibility as well, is to report to the senior management what is happening in the organization. So we do have the audit reports that actually come out to say that, okay, I audited the operations department for this year. Our opinion is effective, or is less than effective because of these findings that we have. So that's actually at the individual function level. But at quarterly or semi-annually, we actually have to consolidate the results together, and we have to see, is there a theme? Is there a common theme that's happening across the divisions? How do we do trend analysis? The number of less than effective reports last year versus this year, is it saying something about the changing risk profile and control profile of the organization? These are the things we have to think through before we report to the board, so that they can fulfill their responsibilities appropriately, and we can provide them insights around what's happening, what is the emerging risk, and what we're concerning about. So hopefully, this highlights, provide you an idea that internal auditors deal with issues that are fundamentally important to the survival and prosperity of any organization. And we actually have to look beyond risks and statements. We have to consider wide issues such as the impact on reputation, the impact on the environment, the employee conduct, management effectiveness, local regulations, and cyber security. All these are not directly linked to financial statements. So let me use a typical example here of what an organization looks like in India and what kind of things we think about as an internal auditor. So a foreign financial institution like my firm, we typically, at minimum, we have 2 legal entities in India. We have one regulated entity, this may be a bank, maybe a non-banking finance company, that will be doing the local securities business, IBD per se. And then we'll typically have what we call a global capability center, which is only regulated by the Companies Act. So let's think about this picture. One financial institution and one global capability center. And when we look at the characteristics of these 2 entities, right, by virtue of them sitting in India, we have to think about Companies Act, that's number 1. We have to comply with, say, the corporate social responsibilities regulations, the local laws, the other laws like information security, privacy, and legal. So that's the local context. On top of that, the banking or the financial institution entity will also need to comply with the RBI regulations and circulars, the SEBI regulations and circulars. And those circulars would dictate what they expect to be in place for risk management, information securities. There's also the sales practices, etc. The licensing of the employees doing regulated business. For tax as well as business incentive purposes, we will likely put the GCC entity in a special economic zone or a software technology parks of India in order for us to enjoy benefits from the government. So because of us putting our entity there, it means that there's also additional conditions that we need to comply with. And then looking inside the activities of the Global Capability Center. Usually, these Global Capability Center activities will be covering worldwide. So they could be doing engineering support for multiple entities across the world. They could be helping to prepare regulatory filings for US, for EMEA. They also could be doing operations like settlements, processing cash, trade matching per se for multiple legal entities across the world as well. So how do we interpret this information? And as I go through, you should also think about what is the skill sets and what is the knowledge an internal auditor needs to have in order to cover these 2 entities. So from a risk-based and objective assurance perspective, I would only think about, or I should be able to opine around the ability of both entities to comply with the local laws and regulations. Right, so I need to have knowledge around the local regulations. There's also, of course, for the GCC, I need to actually understand what is the conditions imposed of being in a special economic zone, or STPI. The bank or the MBFC entity, we need to understand the RBI circulars and regulations, or as well as the exchange circulars and regulations as well. So that's the additional knowledge you need to come through. And then last but not least, because the GCCs are actually performing activities on behalf of all the global entities around the world, so they need to understand US Fed regulations. They need to understand the UK and the EMEA regulations. They need to understand APAC regulations. So, and then last but not least, from accounting standpoint or even financial record standpoint, because I have to do all these activities, one of the concerns from a taxation I will have to think about could be transfer pricing. So even though this is a construct, and we have 2 different constructs, the way we think about risk, the way we think about what we need to cover, have to span across thinking through the attributes, the laws, the activities, and then, of course, the people as well, when we define about what do we want to cover and what knowledge we need to possess in order to cover. At this point in time, during the pandemic, what was very telling was the potential of India. So during the pandemic itself, yes, there was a lot of chaos, there was a lot of difficulties. It's not only India, it's also globally as well. But what I do observe, and my competitors as well observe, was that the number of new entrants coming in India as global capability centers. So, and also on my organization, as well as other organizations as well, what can we migrate more to India? because the breakthrough of technology, the receptiveness of virtual working actually open up more doors. So we start discussing around what are the new functions coming that can be done without impacting the laws and regulations of the respective jurisdictions. So from an advice perspective, we started to discuss a lot around this, and we have to go through things like, okay, can this activity migrate to India? Is this licensed or not? What supervision structure that needs to be in place? So if I were to use an example like Singapore, which has the individual accountability regime, is not just plainly plucking an activity and putting here in India. We need to set up the escalation protocol, and we also need to set up to say how do we report back to Singapore in order to make sure that the Singapore management fulfill their responsibility of meeting the individual accountability regime. Right? So it's doing the work, the skill set to be sent here, and the protocol to go back so that both sides are done and the Singapore entity can fulfill its responsibility on the basis first that they can outsource that function to another country. So these are the top process you have to go through. Then we think about migration. Is there training enough? Is there leadership in place to monitor? How long do we parallel run the activities in order to minimize execution and processing risk? So those are the top process we all have to go through during this whole pandemic period as more functions actually move to India, and also the impact on people movement. So, hopefully I think up to now, it gives you a bit of idea of what do we do and what do we think about. But I thought it may also be interesting to highlight a few trends and evolutions of internal audit that I've observed in the past 20 plus years that I have been involved in this profession. So let's first talk about people. Yeah. When I first started in the profession, majority of the auditors are business auditors. We have some technology auditors, but majority are business, and they are mainly chartered accountants. So the way we approach is, because chartered accountants were trained in audit, so we'll come back, they'll come and join the team, and we train them on the subject matter, depending on which industry and also which function that you are assigned for. However, in the past years, we became increasingly diverse in terms of hiring. Instead of hiring chartered accountants and training them from scratch, we actually reverse hire. So we hire subject matter practitioners and teach them audit. So that typically happens in the engineering space, developers. I will see that there's a lot in the risk, financial reporting. And that actually talks around the depth as well as the complexity of the functions that's being performed out of India right now, and also the demands of the organization. Because each of this is such precise and such deep knowledge that's required to do that, it's actually very difficult to train a fresh auditor on the subject, but it's actually easier to actually get a subject matter and train them on audit. So I think that was one key trend that has happened. And for now, I would say that my team is probably around 50-50, 50% chartered accountants and 50% practitioners turned auditors. The other trend I see was definitely the ratio of the team members. When I started, probably around 80% is business, 20% is technology. But now it's at least 50-50, if not 55-45. And that's actually a reflection around the use of technology in organizations, particularly through this pandemic. Right? It really pushed through digitization, trends of the organizations. It really challenged people on the way that they work. And before that, right, due to the volume and the scale of the activities and complexity, there's no way you can do it human-wise. So a lot of the audits became integrated, whereby you need both the engineering auditors as well as the business auditors to work together. So the ratio of the auditors have changed as well. When I look at the skill sets of the individuals, before that, mainly we go for CA. After that, we might get CIA. The engineering auditors may get CISA as certification. But today, we actually have to invest in people. If you are covering compliance, you should get CAMS. You are covering risk, you have to get FRM. If you are covering, say, for example, engineering, you may have to get AWS, blockchain, etc. So the demands and then the specificity and the depth of the knowledge becomes much more, and we actually had to encourage people to get more certification in order to help them to do their job better. So CFA, CFE, these are all examples of the certification that we see internal auditors pursuing right now. Emerging technologies. We talk a lot around technology, but what does it mean from internal audit? When I started off 20 plus years ago in statutory audit, we have a team of 6 to 7. we carry large briefcase. So please imagine the briefcase is this huge. We put all maybe 20 plus, 30 plus work papers in the briefcase. 7 of us, 15 briefcases, and we bring them to the clients' places. And we sat down and we camped there for 3-4 months. I was writing processes in yellow A3 paper on pencil, and 6 to 7 of us share one laptop. But what does it mean here for today right now? And how did the use of emerging technology change the way that we work? So when I look at, number one, very simple, like some testing our controls. We may say that, okay, we can't test 100%, and therefore we use sample testing. In the old days, we may think about the frequency of testing. Maybe daily controls, I may test 35 out of the population. I'll choose over a period of time. Weekly controls, I may do 14, etc. So there was a methodology at the time to show that these samples are representative of the activity. But no, we're actually not doing sample testing now. The trend is actually going towards population testing. But how do you do that? That's where data analytics come into the picture. We actually use a lot more data analytics across the life cycle of the internal audit and audit engagement. From planning, we start profiling the team, how much attrition has happened, what is the pyramid of the organization, what are the incidents that happen, what are the activities that happen by months and by dates, so that we can actually think about influence our testing. So we use it for profiling. We also use it for population analyzing. Are there certain periods whereby we need to focus more on or not? The other, when it comes to, say, testing itself, do we actually manually inspect? Actually, we may still do it depending on the testing, but we're also seeing using machine learning to do testing. So, for example, if we do a end-to-end transaction testing for rec filing, which means that we need to trace from the time that the trade was booked all the way it goes into the final rec report. So it goes from the end to the end. We have to verify the trade status in the contract, and we have to do a lot of samples. So how do we do that? Right? We actually have to feed through the contracts through natural language processing to read the terms of the contracts. And then we actually have to leverage technology to actually match the terms that's captured in the system to the contracts, and then it generates the test. I think some of the fun things that my team has done, particularly say for testing of change management controls in system, they actually built a robotic process automation. So they actually were able to do 100% testing by actually automatically retrieving the approval sign-off from the repository, match it to the approvals, and then they generate out the work paper. So the time of the internal auditor is not spent on writing of it. The time of auditor is actually spent on judgment. How do you actually analyze the result of the testing? They will, of course, not be 100% correct of those testing, but it reduces the number of, it reduces your time to prepare and look through. Then your time can be more focused on follow on the potential exception and questioning the stakeholders of how does it look like. Another way of emerging technology was the way that we report to the board directors. In the old days, maybe I will manually collect the reports. Okay, I did maybe 100 audits for the year. Out of 100, 85% is effective, 15% is not effective, and I'll manually list through, and we say last year to this year, this is it, right? But it is not enough now. The organization is very big. We probably issue, easily my organization is at least about 600 plus. Our larger organizations will be more reports, but our 600 plus reports, it could mean thousands of findings, observations that we raise against the management. So how do we summarize that in a very meaningful way to the stakeholders? So this is where, again, emerging technology comes into the picture. We actually had to feed through the findings as unstructured data, and again, going through natural language processing. And they started to identify what could be the common words that come out. So it could be like a word cloud, or we could be identifying potential categories, like if the words fit on this particular parameters, this will fall into this topic. So we started to analyze data in this way in order to derive teams, risk teams, control failure teams, that is meaningful to the organization. So out of maybe thousands of findings we got through, this is common at the organizational level, and this is common at the division level. So this is actually how the the emerging technologies has influenced some aspect of it. For large banks, retail banks particularly like Citibank, Wells Fargo's, who have branches and audit. If you think about their number of branches, say, just alone in Americas or globally, can you imagine an internal auditor taking his briefcase, his laptop, and visit every branch and try to do an audit there, based on the number of people that they have versus the number of branches, the traveling time, right? It's actually virtually impossible manually. And not to mention around the cost of the travel, the hotel stay, the freebies you have to give to the staff for making the business trip. So instead of doing that, we actually started to apply technology to do automated or continuous testing. So as the transaction comes through, we actually use technology to actually do audit year-round. Right? So by the end of the year, you're able to consolidate a result and report back, or you follow up to the respective management to say, this is the sessions I go through. Please explain them to me. So this is a form of technology which gains efficiency, but allows you to cover 100% of a population of branches without actually leaving the office. So, emerging technology is there, but what does it mean on the skill sets of an internal auditor? I mentioned earlier around, roughly we categorize individuals as business auditors and engineering auditors. But does it mean business auditors does not really have to learn around engineering? Actually, that's not true, right? We actually now require business auditors, although they are not trained, say, in system, they are not involved in coding, but they actually need to be comfortable with data analytics. We have to train them on self-service tools so that they can run queries to derive data, and also have to be trained on how do they use the tools, or be able to work and partner with the data analytics team to build tools to help them to run and analyze the population and test what they want to. So the skill sets of a business auditor has evolved over time, where they became what I may call a hybrid auditor. Right? You are mainly business, you have your commerce and your knowledge of the subject, but you need to be very comfortable and proficient in using those tools to help you to do your work better. So I think that is one part around people and emerging technology. I thought it would be interesting as well to talk about the impact of the pandemic to the way that we think, the disruption that it has caused, and also what are some of the questions that the regulators actually ask us during this period. So you may recall the pandemic happened, the rules came, we all went to lockdown. It was very confusing and it's very unprecedented. We don't know how long it will end. We were in a mode whereby we're expected to be at work 5 days a week. And we are supposed to interact with others and work together. And so when the lockdown came, people were very distraught, right? The internet was actually not able to handle at that point in time when everybody went to lockdown. So the ability for us to work and the continuity, the business continuity concept was a big challenge at the time. So how do we start changing our mindset? If I think about very simple, like business continuity plan, the original traditional business continuity plan was, if my office is not available for me to work in the event of, say, a fire or the system, I will move to the business site, BCP site, to do my work there. And usually, in order for BCP site to work, it has to be within X kilometer of my official site, and therefore I can travel and then continue work from there, from the critical business perspective. But upon the pandemic comes in, we all work from home. You cannot travel. So where's the BCP? Right? So along the way, when we started getting more clarity, whereby the law said, okay, for critical business services, you need to get a license and a stamp from the local authorities, then you can travel. It became reverse. Our primary operating model is we work from home, and if it is a critical and things doesn't go well at home, travel to office. So it became a total opposite. But it brought out another point, is that how do we think about location? We used to think maybe, having it in the same city works because you can travel, you can restart your operations on time. But if we look at how the restriction were implemented, it differs from state to state. Right? During that time as well, there was a lot of questions that we received from the regulators was, how much functions is performed out of, say, India as one of the key locations? because a lot of our peers, we all have about between 10,000 to 20 plus thousand, which represents easily 20% to 30% of their workforce. So you think about the concentration risk of the function. If India goes down, can those critical functions that's regulatory bound, customer facing, can that continue? Which will mean reputation impact, inability to comply with laws and regulation, customer complaints. So if India goes down, what can we do? So a lot of us started thinking around, should we put our office in one location? And that's where some of the firms rethink about their strategy about locations. And we actually think about dual city. So by having it in the different state, should one city goes down, the other city is around. So I think that changed a lot our thinking, challenging us around BCP, challenging us around the thought around concentration risk. Another thought process was the work from home. Work from home does not really exist. Work from home was mainly around flexibility. We do it, as and when employees need the flexibility, you could do that. But when you work from 100%, it creates different risks. A lot of us are dealing with confidential information. When we actually look at the data, what makes you so sure that as you are typing, maybe your spouse walked behind you, they saw a confidential information and they play a stock. They buy a stock based on the confidential information. How do you prevent that? We don't know where everybody are. From a company that has maybe 8,000 people in the city at the time, everybody went back to your hometown, and the employees are spread over 200 plus cities. So how do you monitor? The other question that we received during the pandemic from regulators was, how do you train employees about the culture and conduct? We actually increased hiring during the pandemic. We did not stop hiring. And I think that's a reflection of when we look at the potential of India, we transform more processes, and not only us, but across the industry as well, particularly in the IT services industry. The question was, you don't see them. How do you make sure they have the same mindset, culture, and understand your expectation of conduct? What are the fraudulent cases that happened during the pandemic? It was not uncommon whereby the person who went for the interview is not the person who was employed. And that happens for both contingent worker and employees. Other cases that have emerged, one person applied for 2 jobs, competing firms. But you can't tell because he's working from home. You don't see him or her on Zoom. So those are some of the fraudulent cases that had came out, and it was discovered, okay, this person could not perform, but this person could do the test during the interview. Why? It was not the same person, right? So if you don't see it, and this create new risks, how do we ensure it was that person? Third thing about employee onboarding during the pandemic, we usually have to do a lot of background checks as per every firm. You verify your records with the school, your past employment records, your criminal records, etc. We have to do all that. But when everything shut down, nobody is going to respond for you to actually say the schools are not able to provide the verification. So can you onboard the employee? You need the person to do the job. You are missing these checks. So what do? I think that was a time when we had to do a lot of risk-based and commercial decisions, is what risks we are willing to take. So I think a lot of the firms actually forego certain less risky checks, and they onboard the employees with the intention to complete those checks later. And that is a risk that we have to take as well. I think those are some of the examples of the impact of the pandemic. But I wanted to talk a little bit around the execution and resilience as well as the people as well. So what was new to us was the ability for us to execute and process. Before that, we are in office, we are able to execute, we can execute with 10 people. During the pandemic, a lot of people are affected. You do not know when they recover. Sometimes they are not themselves are not affected, but they have to take care of their family members who are sick. And again, there was a lot of confusion. So 10 people, I'm actually easily down by 7. I'm left with 3. Can these 3 do the work of 10 people? And that's where we actually have to rethink around the follow the sun model. Globally, we are affected. We need to prioritize what needs to be done. Can we pass from one time zone to the other in order to continue to function and serve the clients, as well as to meet our regulatory obligatory requirements like filing, reporting per se? There's actually not too much relaxation from the regulators during that time about our filing requirements. But it was very real when we were monitoring day by day what is the execution risk we are facing, what are the things we are deprioritizing, and also for each decision that we make, is it the right decision for employee safety, employee wellness, while balancing the business requirements. The other one was also the trends of people. So we actually encountered what we call the Great Resignation. So a lot of people were mentally very tired. They started to find more calling in life. So there's actually a great attrition that had happened across the industry and across multiple firms. So when we have attrition, we have to replace. But it's actually very difficult to get talents as well. So it also affects around the execution risk. Return to office was more challenging than all firms expected. You may have seen some of the CEOs to say, I want people to go back to office, please to come back. But it's actually getting much harder because a lot of people will say that I can work remotely fine during the pandemic. Why do you need me back to office? Right? So we are actually dealing with changing employee profile, changing employee expectations, and then we also have to balance with the regulator expectation of teaching, ensuring the employees have the right culture and conduct mindset. They are well trained. So, and if let's say I don't provide them certain flexibility, I resigned. How do you go from that? So these practical problems are very real in terms of execution, people retention, that we had to face during the most difficult part of the pandemic until now today. We also continue to address those as well. So I think hopefully, what I've said so far give you a little bit of awareness around the role of internal audit in our organization. What do we really think about? How has emerging technology affected us? And also what really happened and what we were thinking during the pandemic period. I do wanted to also hope that I have provided you some insights and ignite some interest with our, in my profession as well, because the need for internal audit skill sets, the need for internal auditors has intensified during this period. There's a half big joke between myself and my peers, peer head of competitive firms around we are stealing employees from each other because we're just trying to grow our respective teams. There is a talent gap to be filled. The number of GCCs from financial institutions alone was at least 8 to 9 during the pandemic year. And also the mindset, the risk and control mindsets have become very attractive for the first line as well as second line for certain roles as well. So hopefully it gives you some interest to join my profession. Before I end my session, I think Dr. Shubha and Professor Shetty asked me to share some of my thoughts around my professional journey. And I understand that most of you will be passing out this year. And hopefully maybe, I'll share maybe 3 key points that may be helpful for you to think about as you move ahead into your professional journey. The first point I would say that is invest in yourself. After you passing out from this university, that's not the end of your learning process. You will have to continue to invest. And that's why when I talked a bit earlier, a lot of my team members, CISA, CFA, FRM, CAMS, there's a lot of additional certification that they take in order to make sure that they remain relevant. But when you choose an organization, make sure that you choose an organization that aligns with your learning interests and have the resources to support you, because you want to become the employee of choice. As we strive to become the employer of choice, you also need to become the employee of choice. You'll find it also, that I would say practically speaking, you find it easier to attain all this certification in the early part of your career. So in the first few years. In the later part, it will become harder due to competing priorities as you experience different life events. You will find it very hard to squeeze time. So if you do, as you embark on your respective careers, do focus on the first few years of your career to actually take up those additional certification if that's relevant to you. And also, in addition to technical skills, do focus on developing your soft skills, particularly effective communication, leadership, teamwork, and also adaptability. As the regulatory and the operating landscape continue to evolve, roles that have not existed when I started working have actually been created. Things like embedded risk, assurance within the first and second lines, compliance testing. I mean, those are the roles that did not exist when I started work, but they are now become critical roles in those functions right now. While certain roles actually eventually demise, either they were replaced by technology or the individuals did not keep up with the technology change. So continuous learning coupled with your ability to adapt will help you to become much more viable and more attractive as an employer of choice. I think particularly on the adaptability part, you will find that you will have different choices in life. You may be present certain risks. The more likely that you're able to adapt to a new environment, then I think there's much more doors that's actually being open for you and more choices you're able to take. So that's number one. I think number two is place the importance of self-care. And that came out very clearly during the pandemic. To sustain peak performance, you need to be strong physically as well as mentally. I would say that a lot of the top performers that I met in organizations, they are not the people who throw 150% at their work. Usually these people are a little bit miserable because they measure their success by how much they get back from their work, their promotion, which is not 100% that's determined by them. I actually see people who are very balanced, who are very conscious about taking care of them physically and mentally, are the ones that's very successful. So they tend to protect their personal priorities and they continue to pursue their interests. I mean, my CEO, David Solomon, he's a techno DJ himself, techno music DJ, and he's performing in Coachella and etc. But he's pursuing his passion. And a lot of them are very good at managing their calendars to block out personal time, to reflect, or to attend to their personal priorities. And I mean, besides the pandemic, I also was in Tokyo in 2011 when the March 11 Fukushima earthquake happened, right? When the earthquake happened, we were all under the table, the building was going left and right. At that moment in time, you are not working, right? You actually, a lot of them, the network was down, internet was down, but everybody was picking up the land phones, calling their loved ones to see, oh, where are you? Are you okay? I'm safe, right? So this kind of significant events actually strip off everything to ask you to remember what is the things that's most important to you or who are the people that's most important to you. Usually the aftermath, which is the same for the earthquake and the same for this pandemic, was the number of weddings I have been invited to and the number of babies that were born. So you know, it goes back to self-care. It's not only about exercising, you know, meditation per se, but also protecting your personal priorities with your loved ones and also your personal interests as well, so that you are much more holistic and you need that to sustain continuous peak performance. So, and then I think the last thing that I will say is around taking a long-term view of your professional journey. It's very easy to compare with your friends around, okay, how much he or she is earning, where I am now, what position I am, but each of you are running your own journey. You will have different life choices that you have made in your life. So if you think about your career and professional journey as a marathon and not as a sprint, then you actually better to make informed choices. So, for example, the question that might come to you is, should I take a risk in my career? Should I resign from this role and take on a higher pay for now? Do I resign from my role because I need to be a primary caregiver for my family? Do I want to just take a sabbatical? Do I follow my partner to another location? All these decisions, if you take a short-term view with this decision versus you take a long-term view, your decision is likely going to be very different. And also by taking a long-term view with your career, you actually reduces the fear of missing out. And you are able to see that maybe the downside risk that looks at you at this point in time is not as scary as it thought. So I think by taking a long-term view, I'm able to take a lot of internal mobility. So I went from Singapore to Tokyo to India. I did STAs, short-term assignments in London as well. So that actually helped out through. Obviously, there are each decision that I make, there are risks professionally, but they actually pan out better for me overall. In India as well, I think particularly, we tend to lose women employees in their mid-career stage. Usually because they have to take off for being a primary caregiver for children, for parents, or they have to follow their spouse to another location. While in the past, career breaks are seen to be negative. They actually are fearful about them being irrelevant to the workplace. But if I look back now about what companies are doing now, Goldman Sachs was the first one who introduced returnship. Now we are competing with more than 20 companies looking for women who have taken career breaks to attract them to the workplace, right? So as the society change, the perception and change, and you take a long-term view, you can find that actually certain decisions that you make are not that scary, and you are able to, over time, achieve success in both your personal and your professional life. So, ultimately you can have your cake and eat it too. So I think hopefully these 3 points will help you to think as you embark on a career, invest in yourself, focus on self-care, and also taking a long-term view in your journey. With that, I think I'll end off my talk for today. I'd like to wish all of you good luck, as well as success as you prepare on your next phase of your life in your profession. And I'd like to thank REVA University again for this opportunity to speak to all of you. Thank you. Sure.
Now the session is open for question and answer.
Yes.
Mike.
Oh, he's coming over. By the way, all of you are very well dressed today. I was like, oh, suits and jackets. I was like, am I dressed enough? Yes, how can I help you?
Hi, my name is Akib Khan.
Hi.
My question to you is, for an example, if I'm an auditor
Yes?
and for a company, and
Yes.
while doing auditing, I get to know that top level of the company itself is corrupt,
Yeah.
but I'm ethical. In this scenario, but I'm ethical. In this scenario, should I stay there and expose, or should I resign? So what will be your suggestion and why?
I think you need to give a bit more clarity around your situation. Are you considered around, like, are you under pressure on saying not to disclose, or are you actually worried that this is not the organization that you want to go through per se? Because it really depends on the organization, right? And I do not know, when you say management, which part of the management per se.
The promoters, I would say, the startup, what do I
Startup.
say? The people who have started the company, the top level management itself.
Yeah. So I think for myself, personally, I will choose an organization that I can sleep in peace with, right? Because, and I'm not too sure whether the example that you raised is regulated or not. It's a very strong example whereby, if let's say I work for a company who is actually corrupted, and I'm in a role that's supposed to expose it and I did not, I could be barred from the industry in both that financial services, because I could be named, and then whether I will be criminally charged as well. And that happens. So if, let's say, this is coming to the point whereby it threatens about your own ethics and your own morals, and also it put your career at risk, I definitely will have resigned for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I would think of
Yeah. No, I think you need to think through about your choice of company, right? Yes, startups are attractive. Please sit down. It's okay. So startups are attractive. They do pay well because they are very well funded. In fact, I think the money that goes into the fintechs in India right now is at all-time high. Right. So there was, I think during the pandemic, the flow was pretty intensive. But when you choose your profession and also as you grow a career, what would you like to be associated with? When you present your resume to the next employer and they look at this, they know that, okay, there is a fraud. What were you doing? How are you going to explain that? Right. So choose your employers wisely. As the employer chooses you, you should choose your employer to make sure they contribute to your journey, they contribute to your advancement, and not to hinder you.
Yes, next question.
Yeah.
My name is Anil Kumar S.
Hello.
So my question is, according to IAF, Internal Audit Foundation, there is a 54% of the internal auditors were directly involved in scams or indirectly involved in scams previously. For example, Satyam Scam Enterprises, one of the biggest scams in India, where the internal auditor was Prabhakar Gupta, who was recently arrested, and external auditor was PricewaterhouseCoopers, who was an auditor itself. So do you think that there has to be more regulations set by regulatory bodies for internal auditors?
So I think in terms of the internal audit profession, right, let's go back to why these scams occur. I mean, please sit down. It's okay. So why do these scams occur? I would say that a lot of the frauds that I have encountered or I observe, the human being is not bad. Fundamentally, they're not bad. But it's always first positioned by the drive of need. After that is the drive of greed. And then they lost their moral compass, and they then they became numb to what they are doing. And the drive of need, always financial. Either gambling, family troubles, loans they're taken, or other pressure for them to generate more money. My thought is not around the regulated of the internal audit profession, but it's actually what is the environment the individual is looking at. It's actually going back to the earlier question, right? What if you find that the organization is numb to such thing, they actually condone, and you are asked to join, then that, I think, the integrity is gone. Internal auditors goes by a lot is integrity. If you lose your integrity, there's nothing more to be said. So rather than regulation, it's actually more about the culture and also your own moral compass. Regulation itself, what it can do, it can only penalize you to say that after you have done this, and therefore you may not join this profession again, and you're barred from this, and then you can go and do something else. But it doesn't stop the preventative. The preventative is the culture and the moral compass of the individual. Sorry?
Use mic.
You're saying the auditors will go by the... Okay, so it's the culture and tone from the top of the organization, right? So some of the, if I look at some of the, I'm trying to think about an example that is not releasing names. So I need to be very careful around that as well. So when I talk about the culture per se, it's a very broad word, right? It talks about what is the expectations on the employee's conduct. So for my firm, it starts with the 14 business principles. We talk about our emphasis of employees. We talk about we need to put our clients first. We need to talk around the priority around doing our work with integrity. But how does it translate of being operationalized? So let's say disciplinary. Like, for every time we found a misconduct, are we consistently executing the consequence to demonstrate the culture? I myself actually have to fire people because of their mistake that they make. As I said, it's not about that they are bad people, but they make a mistake in their decision, whereby they actually have to, they may have done a misappropriation, or they have cheated on, say, the reimbursement claims. All these conducts, because it goes with integrity, it goes with particularly my job as an internal audit, I have to fire. So that I have to be consistent to relay that tone from the top, that this is the expected conduct from you. I don't care about the amount, but it talks about integrity. And it's the same when it comes to onboarding of employees as well. I think an organization with the right employee, if somebody cheated on the resume about their university degree, it doesn't matter if the individual has been sitting on the job 8 months doing extremely well. You cheated on your resume, you lied about your thing, off they go.
Next question.
Ma'am, very good morning.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for your amount of insights you have given for us. I have one question. As you said about the AI and the robotics, what will be the future of role of internal audit when compared to blockchains and all?
Yeah. So I think number one, the introduction of blockchains, crypto, digital assets per se, it does, number one, you have to improve our skill sets. It also goes back to your organization. What are they doing? What is the technology they're adopting? Right? But I would say that, number one, we have to build our skill sets, and we need to understand the risks relating to blockchains as well as digital assets. It's a very unregulated space. There's a lot of KYC concerns. When we talk about the business itself, can the organization do the business, right? You can do the actual business, which is I sell or I become the platform to do cryptocurrencies, for example, or I can do the business of a derivative that is actually dependent on the movement of the price of that particular crypto asset, right? This one I may not be allowed to do, which is directly buy and sell or something is buy or sell crypto asset, but I may be able to do the derivatives that hinges on it because of the licenses that I have. So from an internal audit perspective, first you have to challenge the manager, what can you really do? Okay, fine, if you're allowed to do this, then number two, what is your technology that you have in place to do this business? So we have to start thinking, okay, do we become the custodian of the derivative? Or do we outsource that function? If we do a custodian of that particular asset, do we have the technology to do it? Do we have the people to do it? Which vendor we are choosing? So all these practical issues start to come in place for us to risk manage. So from the time before we even embark on the business, the internal auditor should be first be able to be involved in helping the management to assess the risk relating to embarking on this business, whether we can do it, should we do it, how can we do it? And after we cross all these hurdles and we start the operations, then we need to be able to validate and give assurance to the management around how are they, whether they continue to operate as they should, as per the parameters that they were allowed to do the business. And last but not least, our responsibility is definitely being able to keep up to date with the evolutions of the regulations surrounding the business, the operations of the activities, the products they are doing, and then also are we able to opine effectively. And then that's the decision we have to make. Sometimes we actually have to employ or engage with external vendors who have the expertise to actually work together with us so that the team can also gain the knowledge as well. And those are some of the things we'll think about when it comes to the AI as well, crypto as well as digital blockchain related activities.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, somebody from the back. Yep. Just stand up, just. He will.
So, good afternoon, ma'am.
Hello.
Welcome to REVA Business School. So, my question is, since each and every nation has its own trends when it comes to working individuals, and also, would that be an obstacle for organizational, like internal audit? And as well as there are many cultural barriers and cultural diversifications. So, how would an organization overcome that? Let's assume you're a part of HSBC. So you're being in India, like in Bangalore from past 3 years, I guess. So would that cultural barrier will be affecting the internal audit when it comes to the performance of an individual?
Yeah. So I think going back to the part, I think this is a different question. I think that's more like Professor Shetty's work about human resource per se. But culture and diversity is, please sit down. So culture and diversity is actually very important to us. Fundamentally, diversity creates more ideas. Diversity makes you do better decisions, and also it brings new ideas. So the product should be better, and that's a business principle that we hold within my organization and also myself as well. Yes, actually, I've gone through different countries. I work in Singapore, I work in Tokyo, and I work in India as well. And there have been a lot of cultural differences with what I was brought up with. But we are very much instilled, and to prepare an organization as well, to welcome diversity, we need to continuously talk about it. We need to raise awareness about it. The policies and the operation needs to protect that diversity. And also, we need to call out if those diversities are not in place. So let's say, for example, myself, right? When I moved to Tokyo, right, there was a lot of, a very simple, I think my day one in Tokyo office. So my culture, coming from grandmas and moms are very thrifty. When you wash your dishes, you use the soup, you wash, you put back. You don't wash the sponge. Why are you wasting soup? So I did the same in my first day in my Tokyo office. And I wash, I put back. And there was a Japanese woman who saw me. She was, my God, why are you doing this? This is so unhygienic. You should wash the sponge so that it's ready to be made by the other person. Right? So it's unhygienic to them, but it's thrifty for my culture. So how do you bridge that, right? And actually, it's a lot from me. Number one, for me to learn. I need to understand the intricacies. Some of the unsaid culture will be, if I'm the most junior person in the lift, I'll stand by the buttons, right? If I am in the meeting room, depending on the by virtue of me in the meeting room, the guests will always sit further away from the door. The most junior person will sit closest to the door. The most important person will sit in the middle, and they will face each other. Right? So those kind of things I have to learn to pick it up. Even the way that I hold my name card. If I hold my name card facing me, that means I'm reading it. It's impolite. I have to twist the name card around so that they can read it from their angle. So all those details I have to learn along the way. And similarly, I think when it comes to India as well, there's a lot of things I have to learn too. Like, I actually came from Singapore, so majority of the people or the culture that was imported was mainly from Chennai, Tamil Nadu, because that's where the trades and then the immigrants tend to come from. Then I came to learn that there's so many, it's so rich. There's so many language. I cannot distinguish at the time between Kannada and Hindi and Malayama and all this, right? So I had to understand they exist, and also they have different cultures. The food was different. I mean, some of the things that I took for granted was around, the food. Right? When we welcomed Indian visitors to Japan, it's very hard to find vegetarian food in Japan, actually. A lot of the food is non-veg. The stock is non-veg. I have to learn about Jain food and eggs. So, I mean, a lot of it is my effort, but it's also around, what is the culture of the organization and how you're brought up with is, do you welcome diversity? So I think going back to my point around the system that an organization needs to have in place is awareness. That's important. You need to talk about it constantly. LGBTQ+, helping women-related issues, when we have neurodiversity or a disability employees, how we need to cater to them. So education is a must, and it needs to be repeated. It needs to be talked about. Facilities, and how do we operationalize it? So in our organization, we have gender-neutral toilets, right? Simple things like toilet. We don't necessarily distinguish. If a person identifies themselves as queer, they don't identify themselves as female or male, how do they feel safe? So we have gender-neutral toilets for them to use so that they can feel safe in that environment. They can feel like little things like this add up to. Other things could be policies, right? To encourage men to play an equal responsibility in the house, men and women who became parents, they actually have equal 6 months parental leave. So we don't call it maternity leave anymore. We call it parental leave so that we encourage men to play an equal responsibility. So policies like these need to be in place to actually promote diversity. Same for LGBTQ+. When we give a benefit to a spouse, we give it to a partner. Be it a same-sex partner or other partners, you're married, not married, we don't care. As long as you're a partner, we support you. So things like this, you need to have that framework in place to institutionalize and operationalize and normalize diversity in the organization. And last but not least is consequence. If you do an action that is not contributing to an inclusive environment, what is the consequence around that to the employee? Do you call it out? Does the person get a reprimand? Which we do, actually. We may call it harassment at the workplace. We will talk to it, we record it, and we have mechanism to deal with it as well. So in order to do that diversity, we need to do that. I mean, just on the country side, we actually do have country diversity as well. For a newcomer that comes to it, there will be a person who sit down with us to coach us through this is around this country, these are the things you need to work out for. So these are all mechanisms that an organization can have to actually support inclusivity and respect for diversity at the workplace.
Ms. Lim, you would like to go for more questions?
Yeah, sure. I can go for more if it is. Yeah, if there's. Do you have time? I mean, we have. Yeah, I can take more questions.
Questions? Okay, let me kickstart with some questions from faculty end. All right. So you just have some time before that, and then you can prepare your question and ask her. The first question is, what is the internal audit process followed at Goldman Sachs?
So actually, the internal audit process itself is not very different from firm to firm because we do have the internal audit life cycle framework that is actually across. So in terms of the execution of the audit, we have the planning, the fieldwork, and the reporting. So that doesn't change. We do have the risk assessment process to prioritize the audit plan. That doesn't change. And we also have the reporting to the board of governance, the board of directors, the governance bodies. That doesn't change as well. I think what could be different is how we do it, right? A organization that could be smaller, their techniques and their tools maybe not as complex, whereas an organization that is more regulated, like financial institutions, the tools that we use could be much more complex. Like we use a lot of data analytics, we use emerging technologies to help us to do our work better in both the execution as well as the reporting. So I think that's the difference. But the fundamentals, the framework, the life cycle, that doesn't change.
Okay.
Yeah.
The second question is, anybody from the audience? Okay, I'll continue with second question. Can you brief us as to how internal audit automation has led to achieve faster audit cycles and reporting?
So if I go back to my earlier example around the use of robotic process automation, that actually helps in the control testing. We actually use a lot more of analytics to help us to profile the function. But do we say necessarily that we have shortened the audit period time? It not necessary, but it increase the depth of the work that we do. The objective is not to speed up and run audits and issue reports as fast as possible. In fact, I think a large part of the audit life cycle and the time-consuming portion is actually the discussion with the stakeholders. Right? Do you get their buy-in on the findings? Do you agree with the risk ranking of the findings? And also, do we agree on the action plan? So that judgment part, that discussion actually takes up quite a bit of time. But we try to save time a little bit or efficiency on the execution of the testing itself, but at the same without compromising the depth. And I think in terms of the planning, I think those are the tools that we use. But overall, the time itself may not necessarily. But I think going back to continuous auditing for branches and audits, those are those are examples whereby same number of people, but you can do a lot more.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm adding to the previous question in the context of automation.
Yep.
Is internal audit a good career path?
Yes, of course. I need you. Yeah. Look, I think, I think a few points is internal audit is a profession, is respected. I mentioned earlier that my peer firms, Wells Fargo, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, myself, we are all fighting with each other. We say, take your staff, you take my staff. And the market is very small, so we definitely have a need for more auditors. And that's also reflective about the size that we're growing, but which is also a consequence of the number of functions that's come to India, right? I think the other part is also the attractiveness of the skill sets. So a lot of my team members who left, they actually went to, not all of them went to internal audit. They actually went to, say, in engineering, data assurance. Some of them could go to first-line quality assurance role. Some of them went to head operations, because it's not just about the skill set, the actual audit itself, it's the mindset, the risk and control mindset that was built that opened up more doors for them to actually explore different careers and also be equally successful as them as well. So that risk and control mindset was the one. So I talk about fungibility of skills, adaptability of roles. Building the foundation with audit has definitely opened up a lot more doors for different individuals. A few of my colleagues, some of them came back to become internal audit because they like it, they like the job. But I mean, there's actually much more you can do, henceforth, by acquiring internal audit skills.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
but
you.
we need more people, yes.
Okay.
Hi, ma'am. This is Nagendra here. Can you tell us what is the role of internal auditors in incorporating GRI standards and ESG reporting?
Sorry, you are saying ESG and?
GRI standards, global reporting initiatives, and ESG reporting. What role does internal auditors play over there?
Yeah. So ESG is something that's very top of the mind right now. We think about what is the role of the organization being involved in ESG-related initiatives. I'll break it out into two parts, roughly, right? One is the disclosures, and then the other one is the business itself. For example, do we sell ESG-related products? Do we think about, do we actually do, activities that's related to that, right? So just on first the disclosure itself, we need to make sure that the organization comply with the regulations. This is still evolving. The regulations, country by country, is different. But our role then is, are we reporting it correctly? Are the data collect is fine? Do we report it accurately to the regulators as per expected? So that will be what we look at from a disclosures perspective, by looking at the controls and designs and processes to contribute to the output of the mandatory disclosures. Now, from the business side, right, I think what is very pertinent right now when it comes to products is greenwashing. Okay? So do we, before we start to sell this product or we try to sell this fund and the underlying companies, did the business do enough due diligence to make sure that they are not doing greenwashing? It's actually a growing space right now. There are more attention right now around greenwashing. So due diligence is a process that we have to go through. Is the due diligence comprehensive enough? Do they look at the management? How do we track their performance? And also, do they actually really do the work do the activity that to say they're representing to do, like build the windmills, etc. Right? So that's on the products part. And then also the organization contribution to ESG. Right? If let's say, for example, on the facilities wise, do we think about the firm who represent themselves to be, I'm LEED certified per se? Do I actually have the facilities in place? Do my operations contribute to pollution? From a corporate social responsibility, if this is an area that I want to, am I really giving money to the right charity, contributing to those objectives as well? So depending on the consideration, is it disclosures? Is it sales of products? Is it internal operation? I mean, these are the facets that we think about when it comes to ESG. I think the other one you're saying, global GRI, Global Reporting Initiative. Is it around the regulatory reporting or?
Yes, it's a part of regulatory reporting.
So I would say that across the firm, one of the very popular growth of function is regulatory reporting, particularly in FEDs, Fed reporting, EMEA, regulatory reporting. A lot of it's done out in India. So when it comes to the preparation of those reports, we definitely need to understand the source of the data integrity. When it comes to GRI, I think particularly end-to-end transaction testing, that's regulatory required testing from the beginning of the source to do that. And that's where I explained earlier around using natural language processing for us to do our job, to cover more contracts and to give opinion on the result of our end-to-end transaction testing. The skill sets of the individual, how they are trained, which regulation. When it comes to designing of the systems to produce those reports, every single line of the regulatory being considered and included in the system specification, and did the system specification produce as it should, right? A lot of times, I think organization, due to the complexity of system that book the trade, may have to go through another system to enrich the data. It goes to here, process, it goes to here. So it may pass through 10 or 11 systems to get the final result. So how do we ensure the integrity of the data going through this 10 or 11 system to arrive at are some of the areas that we look at. So the system flows, the preparation process, the skill sets of the individual, and the final review process before it actually gets submitted to the regulators.
Thank you, sir. You want to ask?
Just continuation to that question. So in case if greenwashing has been identified by an external auditor,
Yeah.
can we blame an internal auditor to be responsible for it?
No, I can say that internal auditor do get blamed to a certain extent, and that's what regulators tend to happen right now. Yeah, please sit down, it's okay. So when I look at the findings against functions, so the Feds, the Japanese regulators, what you are seeing increasingly is when the business fails, the last sentence that will come in is internal audit failed to identify. And that's actually increasingly common. And what we have to do is really to do a retrospective review, why we did not identify the area. Is it because the way that we scope? Is it the way that we do the testing? Is it because the cycle of the audit is not frequent enough to address the area, and that's why we did not identify? So, yes, maybe at that point in time, it makes reasonable sense that we may not have covered that area, or we may decided to defer to another year, but it's increasingly that internal audit is being held accountable, particularly for regulated entities, that we have not done enough of a good job.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. So let me propose a vote of thanks.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
As we come towards the conclusion of the talk, I deem it as my honor to propose a formal vote of thanks on the occasion. RBS Distinguished Lecture Series is expected to inspire a larger dialogue that would foster a sustainable world built through better education, inclusive spaces, and global citizenship. Ms. Lim has touched upon various aspects of internal audit process, and also discussed briefly on different dimensions of the evolution of auditing process with the changing technology. And also she has changed her experience. It was really educative session, ma'am. And this is the direct education that we have had from Miss Lim. And at this stage, I must share an experience with you because this is an indirect teaching that we have had from the coordinator's side. Myself, the dean herself, and even Dr. Subramaniam also, and even Professor Harish also were there in that conversation. I must share this because, why should I share this? There is always this relationship between teachers and students. Even if students give upon us, as teachers, we cannot give upon them. So therefore, it's my responsibility to share, this experience. And, when within my limited knowledge, I have organized events when I was a student, and I even organized students after becoming faculty. But it was the first kind of experience for me when we organized with Miss Lim. She made it sure that she, had a meeting with us. She specifically asked for a meeting, and she asked us specifically what are the demands that we have, requirements our students have, and what are the areas she need to focus upon. And this was kind of new experience to me, and mainly for all of us. And why I am sharing this? This is, a symbolic representation of a mindset of commitment. It doesn't stop there. And after that meeting, she shots me, email back with the gist of our discussion. So, first time I have experienced this kind of scintillating energy. And we from REVA business, REVA family, please give her a big round of applause, because this is really an indirect education that we all have had. And now, since I could, share with you, you're also beneficiaries of this. On this note, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Ms. Monica Lim, Head Internal Auditing, Goldman Sachs, for accepting our invitation and delivering a talk as part of RBS Distinguished Lecture Series on behalf of REVA Business School, REVA University. I wholeheartedly thank you and request you to associate with RBS in coming days as well, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you.
I also thank our Dean, Dr. Shubha, for her continuous support and guidance in all initiatives at RBS. Thank you, ma'am. I also thank Dr. Neeraj, Dr. M. Subramaniam, Dr. Neetu Ghosh, all staff members of RBS, both teaching and non-teaching, for your presence and support. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Most importantly, I would like to thank all our students for your active participation and interaction, which has led to the success of this event. Thank you all. Last but not least, I immensely thank our back-end team for their support. Mr. Anup, Mr. Ravi Verma, Mr. Devanand, Mr. Dilip, Mr. Lakshman, Colonel Natraj, Director General Administration, for their support in conduction of this event. Thank you all and have a great day. Signing off, Professor Raghavendra Prasad Shetty, RBS.
Yeah.